Hey everyone, I just finished watching the Prime Minister's latest interview, and I have to say, there is a lot to unpack. He spoke about two issues that are really impacting Jamaicans right now: the storm damaged households needing urgent support, and the concerns about US immigrant visas. If you have been following the news, you will know these are issues that touch thousands of families and have long term implications for our country. Let's break it down.
Uh, I have a gentleman coming to our broadcast booth. We are at his office, the office of the Prime Minister, Bob. Yeah? So, he's a big man. So, I have to go to him. Thank you very much, Bob. Good afternoon,
then,
Mr.
all
Prime
right.
Minister.
Good afternoon, Cliff. I haven't seen you in a little while.
Yes, you're too busy.
Yes, I am.
Yeah?
Actually, yes.
Busy running Jamaica.
Yes, a lot of things to do.
Yes.
But, we have our hands firmly on the wheel.
On the ship of state.
Yes.
Well, let me begin with what we are here today with the shelter recovery program.
Yes.
Extremely important. People are still, some people, too many people.
Too many. Yes.
Yeah, still having the sky as their roof. Yeah. What essentially, as Prime Minister of Jamaica, are you saying to those people who have lost their houses, lost their roofs? A young woman who called me yesterday on behalf of her mother, somewhere in Old Harbor. She's registered. The people from the Ministry of Social Security came, took her number, but she hasn't heard a word from them since.
So she will be hearing the launch is symbolic, the start, but work was being done 4 weeks before. So in a few more days, the calls will be going out for persons to either receive a check, they may receive a text on their phone, because we're using several modalities, meaning several ways to get the vouchers or the checks to them. So it might be digital, or some maybe have to be physical, but the calls will start to go out and people will start to be able to access the financing.
And how many people have so far registered and that the government is seeking?
So it's not, it's an assessment. So they have assessed over 70,000 households. And so they would have, as you said, taken numbers, they would have looked at the damage, got a sense of the needs. So now they will be making the calls, right? Now, the total damage in terms of number of households, very difficult to gauge. If we use satellite imagery, that could be as high as 150,000. And that's a lot. If you were to say, 3 or 4 per household. And that's why the assessment is critical, that you have to go and physically inspect the damage. And that's what we've been doing. And so we have physically inspected 70,000 plus households.
So tell me, how much you can do? How much can the government of Jamaica do?
God, I mean, I want to give hope, but I don't want to be unrealistic.
Yes.
So which is why we've started with the most severely affected. That's where the effort is going to be. So there might be some persons who are minor damage. They've lost a few sheets of zinc. They may have lost the roof over one room. The house is still structurally sound and shelter is still viable. They can put up a tarp and they will be able to survive. But, when you think of an elderly lady and she has lost her total house, a 2-bedroom, and everything is gone, we want to get to that person first. We should be able to address everyone who has total loss. We should be able to address, I would say, upwards of 80 to 90% of those who have some major loss, address in terms of getting the grant to them. And then we will deal with the minor as we are able to.
Yeah. And the grant, you have a maximum amount, of course.
Yes. So one of the reasons why we couldn't start earlier is that we didn't want to commit to an amount, not knowing what the overall would be. So, when we started, it was looking, a particular distribution So we would have maybe 30% of those assessed would need full grants of $500,000. But as you progress through the assessments, you would find maybe that figure would change. All right, so you don't want to commit too early to the category. So we are at this critical point now where we can commit to the category, because as we do more assessments, the categorization isn't changing. So you know you have reached that level of saturation. So now 500,000 is the maximum that we can give for a severely damaged household that is assessed.
Yeah.
200,000 for what we call major damage, and for minor damage, 75,000. Now, just a qualification: the restoration of the household is not just the rehabilitation of the restoration of the roof. Some people may need furniture. They suffered water intrusion. Some persons need to get their kids back to school. That's their priority, and their kids may have lost all their uniforms and their school books. So some of the grant that we're giving, we're going to make it unrestricted, meaning that you can use it for things other than roofing, hardware, material, or restoration of your roof. Now, we encourage persons, even with that $75,000, which we call the rehabilitation portion, to use it for things that are going to put you in a meaningful position. Right? I know that a part of the response to trauma, sometimes, people might say, you know what, I'm going to have a drink, and you end up at the bar. I'm just using an extreme example, obviously, but don't do things that are not going to help you in the recovery. Yeah.
How satisfied are you so far that the government bureaucracy has been working in responding to the needs?
Let me say this: we must acknowledge and give high commendations to the first responders, to the staff members who themselves suffered damage but were still out there. Without question, Jamaica has committed hardworking public servants and civil servants, without question. Generally, however, there is a challenge with our bureaucracy, and bureaucracy is not a bad thing. I mean, bureaucracy is one of the characteristics of civilization. It's a characteristic of a modern society. There is a bureaucracy. The challenge is, however, that bureaucracy of itself can become self-serving, meaning that the bureaucracy exists to make sure that the I's dotted and the T's crossed, not that the letters come together to spell a word. In other words, they are focused on the form and not the function. They're focused on the process and not the results. In a disaster, that can be a challenge, because you really need to get to the people who are suffering, but you have to pay attention to process. Because at the end of the day, if you don't pay attention to process, you will be able to help less people. That's the reality.
Right.
So we have had this balancing act of trying to, as best as possible, dot all the I's and cross all the T's, whilst quickly delivering benefits. And I will never say that we couldn't do better. I think we
So
can
where
do
are
better.
you with the national institution to really oversee the recovery?
As I said
You
earlier,
have been
everything
promising to give us the details.
everything is being done in parallel. So I will commit to the nation shortly, as I will do with enough significant way. You'll get all the details. Some of that has to be carefully planned. And to be truthful, I've had to give a lot of thought to it directly. It's going to be a kind of new organization, new effort, and I have to make sure that some of the nuances and the political sensitivities and all of these issues are addressed, because you don't want to start and then you run into a roadblock. I have taken on, large transformational things before, and then you end up in a political roadblock. So I'm trying to make sure that this one, which is so critical to our national development, that it has full support, and that it is on sound grounds legally. So when it starts, it's just...
And by full support, it means that you're consulting with all the stakeholders, including
it will be
the private sector, the
yes,
opposition.
It has to have that level of support. Think about it. Our GDP is anywhere between 20 and $21 billion. All right.
US.
We potentially could spend $6.7 billion in between 3 to 5 years doing reconstruction.
Yeah.
And if you do it in a synergistic way, in other words, you could get more than the value you spend. So this is an opportunity for us to increase our GDP by even as much as 50%.
So you're ensuring that the opposition is on board.
So the opposition has to be on board. I mean, look, let's be practical. You're never going to get the opposition on board fully with anything, but at least you want to be in a position where transparency can address any form of cynicism.
The question of rebuilding with more resilience embedded, yeah? For example, roofing and construction. Where are we with that? What's the guideline? What's the policy?
So look, Jamaica's building laws are there already with resilience built in. The last iteration of our Building Act would have these things in there, you know. So it's not a problem of legislation. It is a problem of enforcement. That's what it is. So that's one. The authority is there, but can they enforce? Do they have the staff? Do they have the means? Do they have the surveillance to enforce? So that's one. And the second issue is the public education. Is the public aware? You know, we can't take it for granted. You know, everybody's putting up a house and people are building, putting ply and lumber, but do they actually understand that there are ways to strengthen your home against a Category 5 or a Category 4 hurricane if you just do these simple steps? So the mainstreaming of proper construction knowledge is something that we're going to have to do. In other words, we want to make it a culture. Now, sometimes, you know, events create culture. Without question, Hurricane Gilbert created this culture of a slab roof. Right? I grew up in Hurricane Gilbert. You obviously were a big man at that time. I was just a teenager. I looked through my window, peered through my window during Hurricane Gilbert and saw a roof did like this. Took off. So, and from then, you know, my preference has always been, you know, slab, concrete. But even that, you have to build with a certain engineering.
Right.
As well. So
because the earthquakes are
because of earthquakes. So the knowledge of construction needs to be more widespread. But then there's another issue now which we have to pay attention to, which we didn't have to consider during the time of Hurricane Gilbert, and that was climate-related events. I'm not going to get into the argument about whether or not climate change is anthropogenic, but what is clear is that we are experiencing more frequent and more intense and more overlapping climate events. That is without question.
Yes.
And the only way to treat with that, aside from the adaptation and other strategies, is resilience. Right. So we have so resilience is not just about the ability to recover quickly from a shock or a disaster. It's about taking decisions that do not put you in harm's way. And so the drive for people to find somewhere to live. People are finding marginal lands. They're going into swamps. They're going on steep hillsides. They're going into places where they don't think anybody's going to see them. And so they think they can live there safely. What this storm has done is to say if you build in an area that is susceptible, that is prone to disaster, there is no safety for you. That is the reality. And so the government can't say, I'm blaming you for being there. The government has to take a position to say, all right, we need to provide safe places where you can get access to build. That is what the reconstruction is about.
Good. For example, Black River.
Yes.
Where are you going to rebuild Black River?
So Black River is the legacy of our colonial history. When Black River was conceived, nobody was thinking about climate change. You know, it was not an issue. When Black River was conceived, nobody was thinking that Jamaica would have so many cars. That we would need to have wider roads, and that we would face these kinds of issues with hurricane and so forth. So if we were to build Black River today, we wouldn't build it where it is currently located, because we have the knowledge and the experience of what is to come and what has happened. So many years ago, maybe 2016, 17, I'd given a directive to the UDC to identify where the third city could be built in Jamaica. Because we do have a kind of spatial development plan for Jamaica and an urbanization plan. And we recognize that all our towns, many of them are centuries old and weren't built for purpose. Whereas they can't sufficiently carry the purpose today. And the last time we built a town was Louisville in St. Elizabeth, in response to the middle quarters, Newmarket flooding. So we asked the UDC to do this work, and they came up with an area in St. Elizabeth, which is very close to Black River. I don't want to give too much details. I'm very reluctant because anything I say can change how markets work, and so I have to be
price of land.
Which defeats the purpose of having a.
So it's going to be more inland.
Yes, we can say that it will be more inland. Yes.
Prime Minister, the issue that we heard yesterday, Jamaicans who are now in the process of applying for immigrant visas.
Yes.
Their lives are now upended.
Yes.
How is the Jamaican government? How are you responding in terms of making a case for Jamaicans? Because the thesis is that they could be a likely public charge on the American purse, taxpayers' purse. Jamaicans are industrious. We're notorious for doing 2-3 jobs in America. We don't fall in that category. How are you responding? How are you going to respond?
Well, first, there are some things, and I'm happy you've given me the time and with a certain amount of leisure to respond, because these subjects require thoughtful responses.
Sure.
When I was growing up, which is not so long ago, all of my friends wanted to go to the United States. They all wanted to migrate. And even when I was at university, all of my friends wanted to migrate. They just could not see a future here in Jamaica. I never took that view. I thought I will stay in Jamaica, I'll work in Jamaica, and I will make the best for my people and my country. It is not that they were unpatriotic and I was somehow superior in my patriotism. No, I think there was just a sense of frustration with the nation. And I think that sense of frustration would have carried for many decades and many generations. And it was in the interest of receiving countries for many years to use Jamaican labor, to use Jamaican talent, to build their GDP. When I became Prime Minister second time around, I visited Cayman. And I was in Cayman, they were having a celebration there, and they invited me to be a guest. And it struck me that more than half of the population in Cayman could claim either being Jamaican or having Jamaican heritage. A developed society that relies on Jamaican talent. And it's not just Cayman. You could go all around the Caribbean. You could go all around the world and see what Jamaican talent has accomplished when paired with good government and opportunity. So the problem was never the people. The problem was always what governments do and the opportunity they create. Somebody has to stay here and fix government and create opportunity. Because it is not always going to be in the interest of the receiving country to have immigration. Because remember, they received immigration on the basis that it was a net benefit to their economy. Now, I cannot make any prescription as to how Americans or any other society view immigration, nor whether or not it's a net benefit to their society, whether or not it helps with not just diversity, but with innovation and the cost of labor and so forth. So that's a political decision for another sovereign country. My job is to create good government and opportunity so that people can make their economic decision not just on a moral position of patriotism, but on the ability to feed their family. This does not happen with the snap of a finger or overnight. Okay? So if you were to take some of the pain points that would push people to migrate, ability to get a job, then a good salary, infrastructure, not just roads, but world-class infrastructure. You want to be able to go to the cinema, go to good restaurants. You want to be able to have, good landscape and streetscapes to feel like you're enjoying modernity and you don't have to leave here to go somewhere else to do that. Place is clean and so forth. Good healthcare, good education, and of course, a peaceful society. Now let's look at all of those things. The lowest unemployment rate in Jamaica's history since my administration. We're practically full employment. All right, so the employment issue is not a problem. No, the problem is we just can't find people to work. Why? Because there's heavy migration. And as you have heard, the birth rate is below replacement. So these are social issues on the horizon that we have to address, all right, if our economy is to grow. The issue of higher wages. Higher wages don't just come because I am demanding higher wages. Higher wages are tied to productivity, and productivity is tied to innovation and the integration of technology, and that means better management, that means higher skills. So to get higher wages, you have to get higher skills, higher innovation, and better strategic management of resources. We're working on that. Then let's look at crime. Clearly, that is where we have made the biggest impact. We have reduced murders, which is the ultimate expression, the ultimate form of violence. And we're keeping that down. And the objective now is to attain peace. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but peace is the resolution of conflict.
What you're saying, Mr. Prime Minister, is that your administration has successfully been dealing with the push factors that would drive people to look towards the US.
Yeah, and as I travel, one of the things I get is that people have been saying, but I'm going to get my Jamaican passport. If you look at the number of applications for Jamaican passport from overseas, it has just increased almost 100-fold, more than that. So people are beginning to look back at Jamaica seriously to come back. Now, for those persons who have, genuinely, there's always a certain number of persons who genuinely want to migrate. They want access. We don't train nuclear scientists here, for example. They might want to take up a course in nuclear science. They have to migrate to that, whatever it is. So those are persons who are going to be affected by this, without question. And of course, we do have an obligation to pursue diplomatic channels. But we must always bear in mind that's a sovereign decision by a sovereign country. And we make no pronouncements on it other than we will use our diplomatic efforts to restore normalcy. But bear in mind the position. We must build our own country. And we need to stop this kind of view that, it's so easy to say, there's a kind of cynicism, but this is no reality. Other countries may very well follow suit. There is a growing public view in many developed countries. And if I don't know if Jamaicans follow international affairs, but you're seeing a growing trend for countries to want to stem immigration. So we need to look.
There's no enthusiasm on your part to really lobby the Trump administration.
No, that's not what I said. That's what I've said.
Jamaicans to be exempted.
No, that's not what I've said. I've said we will pursue diplomatic channels. We definitely will do that. But we're going to pursue even more, making our country the place of choice to live, work, do business, raise families, and retire in paradise. I think that is a greater objective that we must do.
Were you caught by surprise when you saw that Jamaica was included on the list?
I don't want to say too much, but one of the purposes of government is to be a periscope. To look, come out of the water and look to the horizon and see what is coming. So we already saw what could be the future. And so we've been planning and working assiduously towards that. Look, it's easy to say go on and lobby But you also have to be bearing in mind that sometimes these things are called negotiations. And so what are you going to give? What are you going to get? So, the Jamaican public, I think, needs to understand that we are in a different era of global and geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geomilitary politics. And it requires a certain smarts, a certain foresight and thoughtfulness to manage the process to keep Jamaica safe. Bear in mind, in all of this, Jamaica is still, one of the strongest countries institutionally, with one of the strongest economies that still has access all over the world.
One of your predecessors, one of your fellow party leaders, former Prime Minister Golding, in commenting on this, said the man who sits in the Oval Office, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Donald Trump, is a megalomaniac. Would you agree?
As Prime Minister of Jamaica, and I want to repeat that, my job is to keep Jamaica safe. We respect the policies and programs of sovereign nations. If they have a negative impact on us, we obviously will use our diplomatic channels and other channels to bring our case, to lobby, to negotiate, to make sure that the best interest of Jamaica is always pursued and maintained.
So you wouldn't agree with him?
No, I have no views on what was said by anyone else on this matter. My own view is that President Trump is, pursuing a strategic agenda, which I don't think it is a surprise to many. It's well documented. You can read several of the international articles and several of the think tanks and what they have published. So you understand what it is that they are about. We should not be fazed by this. And I think that is where the challenge is. There is an expectation that the global order is always going to be the way we thought it was. The global order changes over time. These policies are not new policies. They were pursued in the early 1920s. They were pursued before. So what we must do as a small, developing country is to be able to position ourselves to take advantage of opportunities that are created and protect ourselves from threats. All right. We should not get diverted into ideological debates, which are just a smokescreen and diversionary from the main issue at hand. At the end of this, we want our economy to grow. We want to remain peace. We must rebuild the areas of Jamaica that were damaged. We must be more resilient. If you were to take the era of the 70s, when we diverted into all kinds of ideological schisms and isms, anyone who went through that today, reflecting on it, could not say that it benefited us.
No.
And so that is what I have learned, having gone through and seen it. Obviously, I was a youngster then, but I was around then.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, right? I am not going to make that mistake. Right? Jamaica will be, as I said, on steady, solid, strategic, well-led grounds.
Prime Minister Holness, thank you much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good. So we're going to leave.
Starting with the shelter recovery program, the PM shared some important updates. Over 70,000 households have already been assessed, and the government is focusing first on those who have suffered total loss. Grants are tiered. 500,000 Jamaican dollars for severe damage, 200,000 Jamaican dollars for major damage, and 75,000 Jamaican dollars for minor damage. What I really liked is that these funds aren't just for roofs. Families can use the money for furniture, school supplies, or anything they need to get back on their feet. The PM also stressed resilience, rebuilding safety, especially in areas prone to flooding or storms. He made it clear that the government isn't just patching roofs. They are trying to ensure Jamaicans can rebuild stronger and safer. And he addressed the bureaucracy openly, acknowledging the challenges of delivering aid quickly while still maintaining proper processes. That honestly really stood out. Then there is the US immigrant visa issue. Many Jamaicans applying for visas are worried about being labeled a public charge. The PM clarified, no visas have been declined or cancelled yet, but the government is using diplomatic channels to make the case for its citizens. What I found most important is his focus on the bigger picture. Instead of just lobbying abroad, he wants to make Jamaica a place where people want to stay. And that means improving jobs, wages, healthcare, education, safety, and quality of life. Tackling the root causes that push people to leave in the first place. Throughout the interview, the PM emphasized long-term planning and strategic thinking. He talked about resilience, urban planning, climate preparedness, and disaster-proofing communities. He reminded Jamaicans that leadership is not just about quick fixes, but about building structures and systems that will serve generations to come. So, to sum it up, this interview was more than just about grants or visas. It was about vision, strategy, and responsibility. The Prime Minister is trying to balance immediate disaster recovery with long-term nation building. And it's a message that every Jamaican should hear. The challenges are real, but the approach is deliberate, aiming to create a stronger, safer, and more prosperous Jamaica. What do you think? Are these the steps that can really make Jamaica a place where people want to stay and thrive? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear what you think about this approach.